Tonight, we begin with a story that connects two explosive controversies, one that threatens to expose the darkest secrets of America's elite, and another that threatens to plunge the world into catastrophic war. A collision of scandals that political analysts had predicted, that Washington insiders had whispered about, and that the American public is only now beginning to understand. A convergence that unfolded not over months of careful planning, but in a single week of desperate maneuvering, one week that saw war drums beating toward Tehran, one week that saw Epstein files suddenly buried beneath headlines of missiles and military movements, one week that revealed what may be the greatest political distraction operation in American history. What President Trump announced regarding Iran has sent shockwaves through global capitals, but what he's trying to hide may be even more explosive. And tonight, China has entered the equation with a warning that changes everything. We stand with Iran. Any attack on Tehran is an attack on Beijing's interests. And we are prepared to provide every form of support possible and impossible to ensure Iran survives. Two scandals, two superpowers, and one president desperately trying to survive. This is the story behind the story, and it begins with a question everyone is asking: is America being dragged toward war to protect one man's secrets? To understand what's really happening, we need to connect dots that powerful people desperately want to keep separate. For weeks, pressure had been mounting on the Epstein files. Courts had ordered releases. Journalists had filed freedom of information requests. Whistleblowers had begun talking. And names, powerful names, protected names, names that had been redacted for years, were beginning to surface. The documents threatened to expose a network of complicity that reached into the highest levels of American power: politicians, billionaires, media figures. And yes, according to persistent rumors that have never been definitively confirmed or denied, the current occupant of the White House, Trump's connections to Jeffrey Epstein have been documented for decades. The photographs together, the parties attended, the quotes praising Epstein as a terrific guy who liked women on the younger side. The reported falling out that some say was personal, others say was strategic. As long as these connections remained old news, buried in the back pages, they posed limited political danger. But the files changed everything, because the files might contain details, names, dates, locations, evidence that goes beyond photographs and quotes, evidence that could destroy careers, evidence that could end presidencies. And suddenly, just as those files were about to become public, a new crisis emerged: Iran, war, missiles. All the headlines anyone could want, all the distraction a desperate man could need. Coincidence? Or calculation? The timeline tells its own story. Monday, a federal court announced it would release the next tranche of Epstein-related documents within 72 hours. Legal experts predicted these documents would contain the most explosive revelations yet. Tuesday, news networks began running previews of what the documents might contain. Anonymous sources hinted at significant political figures being named. Wednesday morning, the White House announced an emergency national security briefing. Reporters were summoned, cameras were positioned. Wednesday afternoon, President Trump stood at the podium and declared that Iran had crossed the final red line and that military action was imminent and unavoidable. Within hours, every news network had pivoted. The Epstein files were forgotten. War was the only story. The documents were released as scheduled, but nobody covered them. They dropped into a media environment completely consumed by missiles, military movements, and threats of regional conflagration. The timing was, as one veteran journalist put it, either the most remarkable coincidence in political history or the most cynical manipulation of national security for personal protection ever attempted. But the administration wasn't done. As questions about the timing began to surface, the escalation intensified. Carrier groups were ordered toward the Persian Gulf. B-2 bombers were placed on alert, reservists received notification letters, and every question about Epstein was drowned in the drumbeat of war. This is the context that the world must understand. This may not be about Iran at all. This may be about one man's survival. But if Trump thought his distraction would go unchallenged, he was wrong. China's response came within 48 hours, and it was devastating. Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Wei stepped to the podium in Beijing and delivered a statement that has transformed the crisis. China has observed the sudden escalation of American military threats against the Islamic Republic of Iran. We note with interest the timing of this escalation coinciding precisely with domestic political difficulties facing the American president. China will not allow the United States to start wars to distract from scandals. We stand with Iran. We are prepared to provide every form of support possible and impossible to ensure Irani's security and sovereignty. The phrase possible and impossible immediately became the focus of global analysis. What does impossible support mean? Military intervention? Nuclear umbrella? Economic lifeline that renders sanctions meaningless? China was deliberately vague and deliberately threatening, but they weren't finished. General Zhang Yuxia, one of China's most senior military commanders, appeared alongside the foreign ministry spokesman. His words were even more direct. We are aware that President Trump faces serious personal legal exposure related to matters we will not discuss publicly. We are aware that starting a foreign war has historically been used by troubled American leaders to distract from domestic problems. Let us be clear, Iran is not Iraq, Iran is not Libya, Iran is not alone. China will ensure that any American military adventure against Iran becomes the most costly mistake in American military history. President Trump should focus on his legal problems, not on creating international crises to escape them. This was unprecedented. A foreign power directly accusing an American president of manufacturing a war crisis for personal political survival and backing that accusation with military threats. The world had never seen anything like it. Let me walk you through the evidence that has led analysts and apparently Chinese intelligence to conclude that the Iran crisis is a distraction operation. The timing: the escalation began precisely 72 hours before the scheduled Epstein document release. Military operations of this scale require weeks or months of preparation. Yet the public justification and alleged Iranian provocation was never clearly defined. No specific incident was cited, no evidence was presented, just vague references to intelligence and imminent threats. This is not how genuine military crises develop. This is how manufactured crises are created. The messaging. The administration's public communications have focused almost entirely on generating maximum media attention. Daily briefings with dramatic language, leaked war plans that seem designed for headlines rather than operational security, presidential tweets with inflammatory rhetoric. All of this generates coverage, all of this drowns out competing stories, all of this serves the purpose of distraction. The document content sources familiar with the released Epstein files, the ones that received almost no coverage, describe contents that would normally dominate news cycles for weeks. New names of high-profile individuals allegedly involved in Epstein's activities, previously unknown connections between Epstein and political figures, financial records suggesting payments that have never been explained, and references, though heavily redacted, to individuals matching descriptions of current political leaders. These documents should have been explosive. Instead, they vanished beneath waves of war coverage, the historical pattern. This is not the first time an American president has used foreign crisis to distract from domestic scandal. Clinton's bombing of Sudan and Afghanistan during the Lewinsky investigation was widely criticized as wag-the-dog tactics. Various presidents have escalated foreign tensions during politically difficult moments. The pattern is recognized. The playbook is known. And Trump, facing potentially career-ending revelations, appears to be following it precisely. And here's where the story becomes even more significant. China's decision to publicly accuse Trump of manufacturing a crisis serves multiple strategic purposes. First, it delegitimizes American military action. By framing any attack on Iran as a personal distraction rather than genuine national security, Beijing makes it politically costly for Washington to proceed. American allies will be reluctant to support a war that looks like a cover-up. American public opinion will be divided, and the international community will view any military action with suspicion. Second, it exposes American domestic politics to international scrutiny. China is essentially telling the world, look at what American democracy has become. A president can start wars to escape personal accountability. Is this the system you want to follow? For nations considering alignment with America versus China, this is a powerful message. Third, it strengthens China's position as Iran's protector. By publicly committing to support Iran and by framing that support as opposition to corrupt American leadership rather than opposition to the American people, Beijing positions itself as the reasonable actor. They're not anti-American, they're anti-corruption, they're anti-war for distraction. They're the adults in the room. This is sophisticated information warfare, and it's working. Global media is now covering both stories, the Iran crisis and the Epstein connection. The distraction is failing, and Trump's problems are multiplying. As the dual crises unfolded, reactions poured in from across the political spectrum. Domestic response: congressional Democrats immediately seized on China's accusations. If even foreign governments can see that this Iran crisis is manufactured for political purposes, why can't Republicans? Demanded one senior senator. The American people deserve to know, are we being pushed toward war to protect a president from accountability? Some Republicans pushed back, calling China's statement foreign interference and demanding focus on national security, but others remained notably silent, unwilling to defend the timing, unable to explain the coincidence. Media coverage began shifting. Networks that had gone wall-to-wall on Iran started splitting their coverage. The Epstein files were being discussed again. The distraction was failing. International response: European allies expressed deep concern about both the Iran escalation and its apparent domestic political motivations. We need clarity on the actual threat. Assessment, said one EU foreign minister. If this is about American domestic politics, Europe cannot be involved. Middle Eastern nations were more cautious, afraid of being caught between American and Chinese pressure, but privately, diplomats expressed alarm at the possibility that war could be started for reasons having nothing to do with regional security. Market response. Financial markets reflected the uncertainty. Oil prices spiked on Iran war fears, but they also reflected a new variable: political instability in Washington. If the Iran crisis is manufactured, it might be resolved quickly. If the Epstein files bring down the administration, everything changes. Uncertainty dominated, volatility surged, and the world economy trembled at the intersection of scandal and war. To understand the gravity of this moment, we must recognize what is unprecedented about it. Never before has a major foreign power publicly accused an American president of manufacturing a war crisis for personal reasons. Never before has such an accusation come with explicit military threats. Never before has the connection between domestic scandal and foreign policy been so nakedly exposed to global scrutiny. The Epstein case itself is historically unprecedented in scope. A trafficking operation that allegedly involved dozens of powerful figures, a mysterious death in federal custody, years of sealed documents and redacted names. And now accusations that the sitting president may be implicated and may be willing to start a war to prevent exposure. If these accusations are true, it would be the greatest abuse of presidential power in American history, greater than Watergate, greater than Iran-Contra. A president using the war powers of the United States to escape personal criminal liability. If the accusations are false, it represents the most damaging foreign interference in American politics ever attempted, a hostile power undermining American military credibility with fabricated narratives. Either way, the damage to American institutions is profound. Either way, the world has changed. What makes this moment so volatile is the pressure converging from every direction on Trump. The president faces pressures that may be irreconcilable. Legal exposure from the Epstein files potentially catastrophic, political pressure to appear strong on Iran essential for his base, international pressure from China threatening consequences for action, domestic pressure from investigators and journalists demanding transparency, congressional pressure divided but intensifying. If he backs down on Iran, he looks weak and the Epstein story dominates. If he proceeds with military action, he risks war with a nuclear-armed coalition and the distraction narrative gains credibility. There may be no good options left. On China, Beijing has made a bold move, but it carries risks. If America calls their bluff, China must decide whether to actually fight. If the Epstein connection proves less damaging than expected, China's accusations may backfire, and if the world concludes that China is simply trying to protect Iran for its own strategic reasons, the moral high ground vanishes. On Iran, Tehran is suddenly the beneficiary of great power competition. But they are also at the center of a potential war, one that could destroy their country regardless of Chinese support. Iranian leaders must decide whether to escalate, de-escalate, or simply wait for American domestic politics to resolve the situation. On the American public, citizens are being asked to support potential war against Iran. They are simultaneously learning that this war may be motivated by a president's personal legal exposure, trust in institutions is collapsing, faith in leadership is evaporating, and the fundamental question, are we being manipulated, has no clear answer. The White House response to China's accusations was furious and revealing. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt appeared in an unscheduled briefing. The Chinese government's accusations are outrageous, baseless, and represent a new low in foreign interference in American affairs. The president's actions regarding Iran are based entirely on legitimate national security concerns. Any suggestion otherwise is propaganda designed to undermine American leadership. We will not dignify these accusations with detailed response. The American people know their president. The American people trust their president. But the briefing raised more questions than it answered. Reporters asked about the timing of the Iran escalation relative to the Epstein release. Leavitt refused to address the question. Reporters asked whether the president had any connections to Epstein that might be revealed in the files. Leavitt called the question inappropriate and ended the briefing. The non-denial was noted, the refusal to engage was noted, and public suspicion grew. The Pentagon's statement was more measured but equally unhelpful. Military planning regarding Iran has been ongoing for months. The timing of any announcements is determined by operational and policy considerations, not domestic political factors. This was technically true. Military planning is always ongoing, but it failed to address why this particular moment was chosen for public escalation. The explanations weren't satisfying anyone, and the questions kept growing. President Xi Jinping addressed the Chinese nation in a speech that was clearly intended for global consumption. His tone was calm, almost professorial, a deliberate contrast to American chaos. He said, "The world is witnessing something troubling in Washington. A leader facing personal legal difficulties is choosing to threaten international peace rather than face accountability." He said, "China does not interfere in American domestic affairs. But when American domestic affairs threaten global stability, the world has a right to speak." He said, "We ask the American people a simple question. Do you want your sons and daughters to die in Iran so that powerful people can escape justice at home?" And he said, "China offers an alternative vision, a world where leaders are accountable, where wars are not started for personal reasons, where great powers behave responsibly. We stand with Iran not because we oppose America, but because we oppose the abuse of power. Let the American system work. Let the files be released. Let justice be done, and let no one start a war to prevent it." These words were calculated to appeal to American audiences skeptical of their own leadership. They positioned China as the voice of reason. They framed opposition to American war as support for American values. It was masterful messaging, and it was finding an audience. Here's what makes the situation even more dangerous. China's commitment to Iran is not merely rhetorical. According to intelligence sources, Chinese military advisors have arrived in Iran within the past 72 hours. Chinese naval vessels have repositioned toward the Indian Ocean. Chinese satellite systems are providing real-time intelligence to Iranian military commanders. Chinese cyber units have reportedly probed American military networks in the Gulf region. All of this suggests that China is preparing for the possibility that Trump will proceed with military action despite their warnings. They are positioning to make good on their threats. Meanwhile, Iran itself has escalated. Revolutionary Guard commanders have appeared on state television promising devastating retaliation if attacked. Missile systems have been moved to launch positions. Proxy forces across the region have received orders to prepare for activation. And in a chilling statement, one senior Iranian official declared, "If America attacks us to hide their president's crimes, we will ensure those crimes are exposed to the entire world." The implication was clear. Iran may have information about American officials, including, potentially, the president, information they would release. If attacked, this adds another dimension to the crisis. Trump may not only be facing exposure from American courts, he may be facing exposure from the very nation he's threatening to attack. Analysts are now considering several scenarios for how this unprecedented situation evolves. Scenario 1, the distraction fails, public attention returns to the Epstein files, media coverage shifts, congressional investigations intensify. The Iran crisis quietly de-escalates as the underlying motivation becomes untenable. Trump faces domestic accountability. Scenario 2, war proceeds anyway despite Chinese warnings and public skepticism. Trump orders military action against Iran. China responds with support for Tehran. A regional war begins, complicated by great power involvement. The Epstein files are forgotten, but so is American credibility. Scenario 3, negotiated de-escalation. Behind the scenes diplomacy produces a face-saving resolution. Iran makes minor concessions. The United States claims victory. The immediate crisis passes, but the underlying issues, both the Epstein files and US-China tensions, remain unresolved. Scenario 4, constitutional crisis. The connection between the Iran escalation and Epstein becomes undeniable. Congressional Republicans break with the president. Impeachment proceedings begin or resume. The administration collapses. The world watches American democracy tested to its limits. Each scenario is possible.